Welcome to On Spec, where you'll hear stories that bring you closer to the globe. This is your host, Ferry Banawa. We're bringing you shared experiences during the pandemic. Some countries are moving on with normal life as the number of COVID-19 cases drop, but others are reaching their peak. In the U.S., where about 130,000 have died, protests for civil rights broke out in the midst of the pandemic. And throughout all that, food and cooking brought people together. Journalist Alisa Reznick has our story.
Every Christmas, my Nana Alicia makes dozens of tamales for family and friends. Red chili with pork, green chili and corn, sweet with fresh strawberries. She makes them all, and they're all amazing. That's why I'd kept my dozen squirreled away in the freezer for months, just waiting for the right time to cook them up. Up until early this year, I was living in Phoenix, not far from Alicia. But then I moved a few hours away to Tucson, and in the chaos, the tamales got moved from my freezer to hers. It was supposed to be temporary. I moved back to Arizona in 2018 after living in Jordan for several years. And for the first time in a long time, I was a short drive away from my Nana's house. I'd go there almost every week for dinner. I always figured I'd pick up the tamales during one of those visits, or even on a weekend when I was back up from Tucson. But then COVID-19 happened.
WHO has been assessing this outbreak around the clock, and we're deeply concerned both by the alarming levels of spread and severity and by the alarming levels of inaction. We have therefore made the assessment that COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic. Pandemic is not...
Alicia is 89 years old, and she's tough. She eats fresh chili almost every day, makes her own beans, and almost never gets sick. Still, the pandemic meant a simple visit like that just wasn't possible anymore. Now, cases are rising again across the country, and especially in Arizona. We can't eat together anymore, so instead, we started talking about it over the phone. Here she is a few months ago telling me what to do with the tamales when I do finally get a hold of them.
You should cook maybe 4 and put them in the refrigerator. And when you want them, you can just reheat them. But you eat like a bird. You don't eat that much.
When I was abroad, I'd sometimes call my grandma to help me make an enchilada sauce on the fly or to help me make fresh beans from scratch. But when I came back to Arizona, I felt like I'd graduated into tamale territory. Making them with her last Christmas felt like getting the details to something I've always seen from a distance. In the kitchen, my quiet grandma turns into La Jefita, the boss.
I think the masa is really good.
No, it's already prepared. It's got to be good.
No, but I mean...
That's her and my mom in a video I took last Christmas. You can hear my mom telling her how good the masa turned out. Masa is a soft, finely ground flour mixture made of dry corn kernels. My Nana used to make it by hand, but when things get busy, she just picks up a fresh batch from the store. Of course the masa is good, she tells my mom in the video. It's already prepared. That day in her kitchen, I watched her march back and forth between the little table and the stovetop, carrying big bowls of masa, cheese, and roasted green chili. On another corner of the table, a stack of thin white paper sat next to a pile of corn husks. This is the assembly line. I watched her spoon the pale mixture into a corn husk. Then her thumbs fold up the husk's narrow tip while her other fingers fold the sides in to make a neat little roll. Thin paper is wrapped around the entire package. My grandma watched as I went through each of those steps myself, and she laughed when my first couple of tamales looked a little bit more like melted cigarillos. I ended up with a few dozen at the end of it. They would have been the perfect meal while stuck at home during the pandemic, but instead they were hours away, buried in my grandma's freezer. I am not the most enthusiastic cook. I have staples that I make over and over again. Family hand-me-downs like matzo and eggs or bean tostadas, and things I picked up abroad like shakshuka. That's fine when you have other options like eating out, but in quarantine, not so much. I've always understood the idea of food as something that brings people together. Everyone is stuck inside, and to put forth a terrible pun, we're all that much more hungry for connection. That's how I ended up scouring the internet for recipes. And I found Jackson Krule.
It's been very weird for me just because I am a photographer. That's my day job. You know, when news happens, I want to run towards it.
Jackson is based in New York, and in normal times, he's photographing Hasidic Jewish communities in Williamsburg. But
I am doing a long-term project on the Satmar Hasids who primarily live in Williamsburg, New York. But unfortunately, for a number of different reasons, they are a hotspot. And I had actually received a grant to photograph them. And I thought about it for a week and really went back and forth. And I decided that I couldn't justify the risk.
That's how Jackson ended up online talking about food. He started featuring meals friends from all over the country had made on his Instagram stories. It was like this mosaic of Zoom dinners, a tiny window into what felt like every corner of America. If I'm being honest, I probably won't ever make 99% of the amazing dishes that popped up on that feed. Still, watching this process from far away made it feel like in the middle of all this uncertainty, we might just be okay. Jackson, on the other hand, took things a step further. Locked in his apartment and unable to do any photography, he started baking bread.
It came from this frustration of not being able to do what I normally do. So I had to channel this creative energy and frustration and whatever other crazy feelings we're feeling right now into something.
That's right. Just like people from all over the states, Jackson started making bread. But this wasn't your average sourdough starter. It was challah. The pillowy, braided mounds of egg-rich dough are usually found at Jewish delis and used for the Sabbath. But non-Jewish foodies love it too. These days, the bread is so popular that you likely find it in your neighborhood Whole Foods.
My wife and I are Jewish, and we are part of a local Jewish community in Crown Heights. So us making challah during this time was kind of a necessity, and we realized that we had friends who were more observant than us, who were not able to get challah.
Jackson says when he first started, making challah was about helping out his community. But after a while, the word got out, and Jackson had people asking for the bread in different states like New Mexico and South Carolina. So he and his wife had an idea. Why not mail the bread?
I've always loved shipping things in the mail. And I thought of a few people who it would be interesting to send it via the mail. And I did it, and they received it, and it held up in the mail.
As the pandemic marched on, so did the demand for challah. These days, it's also a business. Loaves are available now for online purchase for $10 to $15 a piece. Here's Jackson's sister-in-law, Candace. She helps him out with deliveries sometimes.
I think I'm surprised by how many people who we don't know who have purchased or looked at the website or looked at the Instagram. But also, right now, I feel like there are less joys to experience. So if someone is offering challah, why not? I feel like this is the perfect time.
Yeah, it's a good point. I'm also surprised by the amount of people that we don't know who have purchased. It's just I'm trying to get in the mindset of what it's like to be buying stranger bread right now. And, people are putting a lot of trust in me.
It's true. In early April, New York was at the peak of its outbreak. Nearly 800 people across the state were dying from the virus every day. Jackson was baking around the clock, but you may be wondering how the bread got to its final destination in the middle of all this. He did in-person deliveries and sent out mail orders carefully in a mask and gloves. As for local pickups, Jackson got creative.
I have this levee system because our apartment had a balcony, and I tied a rope to a tote bag, and I would lower it off the balcony because we lived off a main street, and people would pick it up that way. And so as a way of me not needing to come down to the lobby, and even then they wore masks, and I left the bag outside, and I would rotate the bag so that people didn't have to use the same one. So in New York City, it was very intense.
By week 3, he was turning out 63 orders a week and growing. Like a lot of us, Jackson says COVID-19 kind of makes him feel like time is irrelevant. Normally, he loves the uncertainty of cooking, the experiment of seasoning, and the risk and reward of changing up ingredients. But in the pandemic kitchen, the opposite happened, and it worked.
I don't like to bake so much because baking is very, you have to follow the rules. You can't add more salt. There's a very specific amount of yeast. There's half a cup of sugar, half a cup of oil, this amount of water and you got to mix it for this amount of time. You got to let it rise for this amount of time. And if you don't follow any of the steps, it just doesn't work.
So with all this uncertainty of our world right now, Jackson says being rigid in the kitchen turned out to be exactly the thing he needed.
There's a time slot that you've subscribed to when you're making it. And I think from start to finish, it's like 2.5, 3 hours. So it's a commitment. And, you know, it's nice to have that 3-hour chunk of structure in this weird time that we're in.
When I talked to Jackson again, he and his wife were taking a break from Brooklyn to live with his in-laws in the suburbs of New Jersey. Challah orders kept coming in, and Jackson kept making them. He would send them back to the city through the mail and hand-deliver them to Jersey neighborhoods. When I called him, he was on a delivery there in May. That's an ice cream truck you can hear in the background.
Okay, dropped it off. I'm not sure if the family is the one buying the ice cream, but I waved to them and they waved back. I dropped off the challah. Thank you for ordering. I hope you enjoy it. Shabbat shalom.
It's been over a month since I called Jackson during that delivery. It was before the death of George Floyd on video changed the world. The killing sparked worldwide protest against systemic racism and police brutality. In New York, in Arizona, and everywhere. Meanwhile, many U.S. states reopened and COVID-19 cases started spiking after holiday weekends. New York City is easing into normalcy, and city officials are cautiously optimistic. But in Arizona, where I am, what started as a moderate outbreak of the virus has ballooned into one of the worst in the nation. Arizona now has record-breaking case counts. On its worst days, the state is clocking in over 4,000 cases a day. More than 90,000 people here have tested positive for the virus. All of a sudden, stories about New York, hospitals being overwhelmed, ICU beds barreling towards capacity, those are hitting close to home, and I have to think about the possibility of them happening in my own state. I wanted to hear how all of this worked on the day-to-day, and I wanted to hear it from Jackson. So I called him. Hey, Jackson.
Hi, how are
you? A lot of things in the outside world may have changed, but Jackson's bread business was still going strong when we talked. A national Jewish company has recently contracted him to make challah and ship it to employees all over the country. That means he's baking and shipping over 120 loaves a week these days, sometimes battling the heat in places like Vegas and the humidity in places like South Carolina. I'm in Tucson, where most days the temperature is well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. I wanted to know, how did he mail the bread in these circumstances?
I rely less on eggs, and it's more so like I was making more of a brioche challah, and now I make more of what's called a water challah. It's like really fluffy, and like if you pinch it, it like kind of is like white bread. It holds up really well, and that's been great for mailing it.
Jackson said he and his wife were still shuttling between their parents' place in the suburbs of New Jersey. He said living with older people meant going out and photographing anything was still mostly out of the question. And by now, Jackson is used to the lockdown. That's why I wanted to know. While I'm sitting in the nation's newest COVID-19 hotspot, how could I keep from freaking out?
It's hard, and I think, accepting that it'll be tough for a bit, and that, unfortunately, we don't know, when it'll be safe to go outside, and just like now's the time to make that recipe you've always wanted to make. I think, it's a scary time, and, a lot of bad things are happening, but it's a really unique time, thinking about who you are and thinking about your family and, thinking about those people that you want to reach out to who you maybe haven't reached out to in a while.
Jackson says, of course, this time is hard on everyone, but maybe it's a chance to do things you didn't have time to do before. Or, in other words,
keep yourself sane and maybe even leave COVID quarantine better than you entered it.
I think that's what everyone is trying to do these days, in one way or another. For Jackson, having a project that's as regimented as baking has been calming. But honestly, for me, cooking is something I've ended up seeing as more of a chore. Every dish cooked means more dishes to clean and more time out of the day. But recently, I was able to get my hands on those frozen tamales at my Nana's house. On the way through Phoenix the other week, I called ahead, wore a mask, and met her on the front lawn. Working as a journalist means I've come in contact with a lot more people than I think she should be exposed to right now. So our visit was brief, The tamales were thawing in my hands in the midday heat, and my phone was exploding with messages from work. Still, chatting with her across the fence that day felt like the first sign of normalcy in a while. And I felt it again when I got home and plopped a few of the little corn husks into a steamer. Truth be told, I almost burned them, but when they were done, I realized tamales really are the perfect quarantine food. Self-contained, low maintenance, and almost no dishes to clean up afterward. I still stick mostly to my staples in the kitchen, and I may not have that big COVID-19 awakening Jackson was talking about, but I still call my Nana to ask her how to make sure chili rellenos don't stick to the pan, or how long to let dry beans boil on the stovetop. Right now, those calls about food, they're the way we care for each other. Jackson does it by baking and sending loaves of bread in the mail. And at a recent Black Lives Matter event I covered here in Tucson, I watched people do it by handing out snacks and water to fellow demonstrators. By now, the country has moved beyond the days of mass sourdough, but the real power of food is its ability to connect, and I think that is here to stay. I'm Alisa Reznick for On Spec in Tucson.
Since Alisa reported this story, there's been a rapid rise of COVID cases in Arizona. More than 100,000 people have tested positive. Thanks, Alisa, for the story, and thank you for listening to On Spec. This story was edited by me and produced by Oscar Duran. Thanks to the European Journalism Center for funding our pandemic season. You can see Jackson's photos on his Instagram at Jackson Krule. That's spelled JacksonKrule. And if you want to order challah, which is spelled challah, you can check out his website at sendmechallah.com. That's SENDMECHALLAH. In our next episode, we'll take you to Iraq and tell you about the shadow pandemic, rising domestic violence. Tune in. And don't forget to rate and review On Spec Podcast. Your feedback means a lot. Till next time.